The waiter skipped Sammy Davis Jr. and moved to the next person without looking at him. Dean Martin's chair scraped the floor as he stood up before the waiter even finished turning away. Frank Sinatra's hand froze mid-reach for his wineglass, and John Wayne's eyes locked on Dean like he'd just watched someone light a fuse. Wait, because what Dean Martin did in the next 2 minutes at that Los Angeles restaurant wasn't just about one dinner, and nobody in that room understood they were watching a man draw a line he'd spent 20 years preparing to defend. The reservation at Dino's favorite Italian spot had been made 3 days earlier, Thursday night, March 1960. 8 o'clock, table for 4 in the corner, where the light from the street came through the big window and hit the white tablecloths just right. They'd been planning this dinner for 2 weeks, just the 4 of them. No press, no photographers, no crowd. Frank had a recording session at 11 and couldn't be late, which meant they had 3 hours if everything went smoothly. Dean Martin wanted good pasta and better company. Frank Sinatra needed a night off from the sands before heading to the studio. John Wayne was in town for exactly 48 hours between film shoots. Sammy Davis Jr. had just closed at the Coconut Grove and wanted to celebrate with friends who actually understood what it cost to stand on a stage and make people forget their problems for 2 hours. The restaurant was the kind of place where producers made deals and actors pretended not to notice each other. Dark wood paneling, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut you. The owner, an Italian guy named Carmen who'd come over in '38, knew everyone and remembered everything. He'd seated Dean at this same table a dozen times. They walked in together at 8:15. Dean first, then Frank, then Sammy, then Wayne bringing up the rear. The maitre smiled, grabbed 4 menus, led them to the corner table. Other diners looked up. 4 of the biggest names in entertainment walking through your dinner like it was nothing. Dean pulled out his own chair. Frank ordered a Jack Daniels before he even sat down. Wayne settled in with his back to the wall. Old habit from too many westerns. Sammy took the seat facing the room. He always did. Better to see what was coming. Look at this table right now, because in 90 seconds, everything these 4 men thought they knew about this ordinary Thursday dinner is about to change. The waiter arrived 90 seconds later. Young guy, maybe 25. White jacket so starched, it looked like armor. Pen and pad ready. Professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stopped at Dean's right shoulder. "Good evening, Mr. Martin. May I start you gentlemen with something to drink?" Dean glanced at the wine list. "Bring us the Chianti, the 55 if Carmine still has it." "Of course, sir." The waiter wrote it down, turned to Frank. "And for you, Mr. Sinatra, you already got my Jack Daniels coming, right?" "Yes, sir. On the way." The waiter shifted to Wayne. "Mr. Wayne, bourbon, neat. Excellent choice, sir." Then the waiter did something that made the air in the room change. He turned back toward Dean, skipped right over Sammy like the man wasn't sitting there, didn't even glance at him, just pivoted on his heel and started to walk away. Dean Martin stood up. Not fast, not angry, just stood. His napkin fell from his lap to the floor. He looked at the waiter's back. "Hey." The waiter froze, turned back. "Sir, you didn't ask my friend what he wanted." The waiter's face went carefully blank. "I apologize, Mr. Martin. I cannot serve that person." The restaurant didn't go quiet all at once. It was more like a wave. The tables closest to them first, conversations dying mid-sentence. Then the next ring out. Then the whole room. 60 people eating expensive food and drinking wine that cost more than most people made in a week. And every single one of them stopped talking to watch a man standing at a corner table. Notice what happens in a room when time seems to slow down, because the next 10 seconds will determine whether this becomes just another bad night or something that people talk about for the next 40 years. Dean Martin took 1 step toward the waiter. Just one, hands at his sides. No aggression, but something in the way he moved made the kid take a step back. Dean's voice came out quiet, flat, the kind of quiet that was somehow louder than yelling. "Then you're not serving any of us." Frank Sinatra's hand, the one that had been reaching for his water glass, changed direction, went straight up in the air, index finger extended. The universal signal for "get me your manager right now." But he was watching Dean. They were all watching Dean. John Wayne stood up. Didn't say anything, just stood. 6'4" of silent support, arms at his sides, eyes on the waiter like the kid had just insulted someone Wayne cared about, but he didn't move forward. Dean was handling this. Sammy Davis Jr. put both hands on the table, started to push his chair back. Dean turned his head slightly, looked at Sammy. "Sit down." "Dean, really? I don't want to." "Sit down." Sammy sat. His hands stayed on the table, fingers spread like he was trying to hold on to something solid. His face had gone very still, very composed. The kind of composed that came from practice. Dean turned back to the waiter, took another step. Now he was close enough that the kid had to look up to meet his eyes. "You got orders not to serve him." The waiter was sweating now. You could see it on his upper lip. "Mr. Martin, it's restaurant policy." "From who?" Dean's voice stayed quiet, but it cut. "Carmine or you?" And the manager said, "Get Carmine now." Dean didn't move, didn't raise his voice, just stood there, between the waiter and the table, like a wall that wasn't going anywhere. Frank's hand was still in the air. Wayne was still standing. But they weren't leading this. Dean was. Here's what you need to understand about Dean Martin before we go any further, because what happens next only makes sense if you know who he really was under all that casual charm. Everyone saw the guy with the drink in his hand and the easy smile who made everything look effortless. But that was construction. That was armor. The real Dean was the son of an Italian barber from Steubenville, Ohio, who'd been called a wop and a guinea so many times as a kid that he'd learned to turn it into jokes before someone could use it to hurt him. He knew what it felt like to walk into a room and have people decide who you were before you opened your mouth, and he'd spent 20 years making sure nobody ever felt that way at his table. The waiter was backing away now. Small steps, hands up, but Dean followed. One step for every step back, keeping the distance the same. "Sir, if you'll just let me get Mr. Carmine." "Yeah, get Carmine." Dean stopped. "Let the kid have some space. And while you're walking back there, think real hard about whether this job is worth what's about to happen." The kid practically ran. The restaurant was still silent. Forks suspended over plates, wine glasses halfway to mouths, 60 people watching one man standing at a corner table, waiting to see if he meant what he'd just said. Dean didn't sit down, stayed on his feet, hands in his pockets now, casual, like he had all night, like he'd stand there until the sun came up if that's what it took. Wayne was still standing too, hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, just there, solid, backing Dean's play. Frank lowered his hand, straightened his tie, but his eyes never left the kitchen door, waiting to see what came next. Sammy took a breath, let it out slow. "Dean, you don't have to." "Sam." Dean didn't look at him, kept his eyes on that kitchen door. "We're not leaving. You're not leaving. And whoever walks through that door is about to learn something about friendship. Remember this moment. Remember the way Dean Martin stood his ground in that restaurant. Remember the way Frank Sinatra waited for Dean's lead. Remember the way John Wayne stood silent because Dean was handling it. Because this is what real friendship looked like in 1960, when it cost something to stand next to someone the world had decided didn't belong. The kitchen door swung open. The manager came out first, guy in his 50s, thinning hair, vest over a white shirt, tie perfectly knotted. Behind him, moving slower, came Carmine, late 60s, built like a wine barrel, white apron over his shirt, flour on his hands from making pasta in the back. He saw Dean standing there and stopped. His face did something complicated. Frank glanced at his watch. They'd already lost 20 minutes. Recording session in 2 hours and change. The manager got to the table first, hands clasped in front of him like he was about to deliver a eulogy. Dean cut him off. Your waiter just told us he can't serve Sammy. You gonna tell me that's your policy? The manager's throat moved when he swallowed. Sir, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't. Dean took a step toward him, not threatening, just closing the distance. Your boy said what he said. We all heard it. Now I need to know if that came from you, from Carmine, or from him. Carmine pushed past his manager, stopped in front of Dean, looked him in the eye. Dino, what happened? You hire people to decide who eats in your restaurant. Carmine's face hardened, turned to his manager. Where's Tony? In the back, sir. He said he needed a moment. Get him out here. Mr. Carmine, I don't think. Now, the manager disappeared, came back 30 seconds later with the waiter. Tony, trailing behind him like a man walking to the gallows. The kid's face was red, eyes down, hands shaking. Carmine didn't raise his voice. Tony, you told these gentlemen you couldn't serve Mr. Davis? The kid nodded. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Tony's head came up. His eyes were wet. Did I hire you to decide who eats in my restaurant? No, sir, but you're done. Take off your jacket. Leave through the back. Tony stripped off his jacket, started to turn toward the kitchen. Kid. Tony froze, turned. Dean's voice stayed quiet. 20 years from now, you're going to remember this night. You're going to tell yourself you were just following orders, or you were raised a certain way, or it wasn't your fault, but you were here. You made a choice, and choices have consequences. Remember that. Tony's face crumpled. He walked toward the kitchen with his head down. The door swung shut behind him. Notice what just happened here, because in the next 60 seconds, this restaurant will either empty out or prove that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't cost you everything. Carmine turned back to the table, looked at Dean, then at Sammy. Mr. Davis, this is my restaurant, my family's restaurant. You are welcome here. You have always been welcome here. Anyone who says different doesn't work for me anymore. Capice? Sammy's voice came out rough. Yeah, I understand. Good. Carmine looked at Dean. Your dinners tonight are on the house, all of them, and from now on, this table right here, it's yours. Any time you call, we make room. No questions. Dean sat down. Finally, like the standing was over. The point was made. He pulled his chair in, picked up his napkin from the floor. Thanks, Carmine. Send someone who knows how to do the job. Carmine nodded, walked back to the kitchen. Slow, shoulders heavy. Dean looked at Wayne. You can sit down now. Wayne sat, pulled his napkin into his lap like nothing had happened. Frank lit a cigarette, took a long drag. Well, that was different. Listen to what doesn't get said in this moment, because sometimes the most important words are the ones nobody speaks out loud. The new waiter arrived, older guy, took their orders without incident. Sammy ordered the veal. Dean got the linguine. Frank wanted the ossobuco. Wayne ordered steak. Nobody made small talk. The food arrived 12 minutes later. Veal for Sammy, perfectly cooked. Sauce so good it should have been illegal. Linguine for Dean, al dente, the way he liked it. Osso buco for Frank, falling off the bone. Steak for Wayne, medium rare, with a side of potatoes that nobody ordered but the kitchen sent anyway, because they knew Wayne and they knew what he liked. Frank checked his watch again under the table. Hour and 45 minutes until he had to be at the studio. They could make this work if they didn't linger. They ate, didn't talk much. Just the sounds of forks on plates and wine being poured, and occasional comments about the food. Wayne said his steak was perfect. Frank said the osso buco was better than his mother's. which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. Dean didn't say anything about his pasta, which meant it was exactly right, but his eyes kept drifting to Sammy, watching to make sure his friend was actually eating and not just pushing food around. Sammy cut his veal into small pieces, ate slowly, kept his eyes on his plate. After about 5 minutes, he set his fork down, took a breath, like he was about to say something important. Dean looked up. You didn't have to do that. Dean twirled some linguine around his fork. Yeah, I did. I've been kicked out of better places than this. I'm used to. Don't. Dean's voice stayed gentle, but firm. Don't finish that sentence. I'm just saying, it's not your fight. Dean leaned back in his chair, looked at Sammy like he was trying to figure out how to explain something very simple. Sam, you're sitting at my table. That makes it my fight. Sammy opened his mouth, closed it. How many times you pulled me off a stage when I was too drunk to remember the words to my own songs. Sammy almost smiled. I lost count. How many times you covered for me when I couldn't drag myself out of bed. That's different. It's not different. You got my back. I got yours. Dean leaned forward. And if some kid thinks he can disrespect you at my dinner table, he's gonna learn real fast that there are consequences for that. Frank stubbed out his cigarette. Besides, the food here's too good to let ignorance ruin it. That got a laugh. Small one, mostly from Wayne. But it broke the tension like a hammer through glass. Thank you, Sammy said quietly. After a moment, Dean looked up. For what? For Sammy gestured vaguely at the room, at the table, at the three of them. This. Sam, no, I mean it. I know what that cost you. Walking out of here would have been easier. Letting it slide would have been easier. But you didn't. And I appreciate that. Frank refilled his wine glass. Didn't look at Sammy when he spoke. We're not good guys, Sam. We're just guys who know the difference between right and wrong. And that kid was wrong. Still nothing. Dean picked up his fork again, twirled some linguine around it. You're our friend. Someone disrespects you. They disrespect us. End of story. Wayne raised his bourbon glass. To friends who have your back even when it costs them something. They all raised their glasses, clinked them together over the breadbasket, drank. And in that moment, with wine and bourbon touching lips, and the weight of what they'd just done settling into their bones, each of them understood they'd just crossed a line they could never uncross. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Carmine came out once to check on them, make sure everything was okay. Dean told him the pasta was perfect. Frank told him to bill them anyway. Carmine said if Frank tried to pay, he'd throw him out personally. Frank said he'd like to see him try. They went back and forth like that for a minute. Friendly threats that both of them knew were empty. Carmine went back to his kitchen. They finished their meal. Dessert came. Tiramisu for the table. 4 spoons. They passed it around like they'd done this 100 times before. Because they had. This wasn't new. This was just Thursday night with friends, except for the part where it almost wasn't. Wayne finished his piece first, sat back, patted his stomach. Good meal. Best in town. Dean agreed. Thanks for not letting me leave, Sammy said. Frank looked at him. We weren't gonna let you leave. Where'd you think you were going? Somewhere else. Anywhere that wasn't going to cause you problems. Sammy. Dean's voice was gentle, patient, like he was explaining something to a child. You being here doesn't cause us problems. People being assholes causes us problems. And we don't fix that by leaving. We fix that by staying. As if to prove his point, 2 tables over, a couple stood to leave, but stopped at the host's stand to make another reservation. Then another couple did the same. The restaurant was already booking tables for next week. They sat there for another 20 minutes, finished the tiramisu, drank their coffee, talked about nothing important. Frank had a recording session on Monday. Wayne was flying to Monument Valley on Saturday to shoot a Western. Dean had shows all weekend at the Sands. Sammy was supposed to be in New York by Tuesday. Normal life. Normal conversation. Like the last hour hadn't happened. Frank looked at his watch one more time. I gotta move. Studio in an hour and a half. Listen to what's not being said as they stand to leave. Because these four men just learned something about themselves they'll carry for the rest of their lives. When they finally stood to leave, the restaurant was almost empty. The few tables still occupied watched them walk out, the same way they'd watched them walk in, with that mixture of curiosity and awe that followed famous people everywhere. Dean stopped at the door, turned back, caught Carmine's eye across the room, nodded once. Carmine nodded back. Understanding passed between them without words. This place was still good, still worth coming back to. The man who owned it had proven that tonight. They walked out into the Los Angeles night. March air, cool but not cold. City sounds, traffic, normal Thursday night in 1960. You guys want to get a drink somewhere? Sammy asked. Frank checked his watch. I gotta head out. Studio prep. I'm flying out at 6 a.m., Wayne said. Need to sleep. Dean shrugged. I'm free, but I'm full. Maybe just coffee. They ended up at a diner on Sunset. Sat in a booth in the back. Ordered coffee and pie. You think that kid learned anything? Wayne asked. Probably not, Frank said. People like that don't learn. Maybe he will, Dean said. Or maybe he'll blame us, Sammy said. Blame me specifically. Decide it's my fault he lost his job. His fault he lost his job, Frank corrected. Not yours. Don't do that. Do what? Take responsibility for other people being ignorant. Sammy stirred sugar into his coffee. Didn't say anything. Every performer's nightmare, Dean said quietly. Someone decides they don't like you for reasons that have nothing to do with who you are, and you have to choose whether to fight it or walk away. I always figured walking away was easier. But you didn't walk, Wayne said. No. Why not? Dean looked at Sammy. At Frank, at Wayne, three men who'd seen him at his worst and still showed up when he called. Three men who'd carried him when he couldn't stand and celebrated with him when he could. Three men who knew the difference between the performance and the person, because some things are worth fighting for, Dean said. And friendship is one of them. The coffee arrived. Strong, hot, perfect. They drank it and talked about nothing for 20 minutes. Movies and music and women and cars. When they finally left and went their separate ways, they did it the same way they'd walked into that restaurant, together, for as long as they could be. Remember what happened at that table tonight, because this is the moment that would define not just their friendship, but what friendship could mean when it cost something real. Years later, people would ask them about that night, about what happened at Carmine's place when the waiter refused to serve Sammy Davis, Jr. Most of them deflected, changed the subject, made jokes. But Dean once, late at night after too many real drinks instead of the fake ones he usually carried around for show, told a journalist what he remembered most. The way Sammy tried to leave, Dean said. The way he just accepted it, like it was normal, like he'd been through it so many times that fighting back didn't even occur to him anymore. That's what I remember. That's what I'll never forget. The journalist asked what it felt like to stand up for his friend that way. Dean was quiet for a long time. Then he said, it felt like the bare minimum, like the absolute least I could do. And if that's heroic, then we're all in bigger trouble than I thought. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. 3 weeks after that dinner, Carmine's restaurant changed its policy, became the first upscale Italian place in Los Angeles to publicly state that all performers were welcome. The sign in the window just said, "All artists welcome." Quiet, simple. The way real change usually happens. Dean kept that corner table for the next 15 years. brought Sammy there at least once a month. Sometimes Frank came, sometimes Wayne, sometimes just the two of them, eating pasta and remembering the night when friendship cost something and they paid it anyway. And if you want to know what really happened the next time someone tried to tell Sammy Davis Jr. he didn't belong somewhere, tell me in the comments.